הרצאה של אחד מגדולי עולם בתחום הזקנה, שאני מקווה שייתן לנו טיפים טובים היום, ופרופסור אולשנסקי מצ'יקגו, שהוא אורח של בית האבות הספרדי, ואני בחיפה, ואני מזמין את מרז המנכ"ל להגיד משפט.
בוקר טוב לכולם, ירון רז שמי, אני מנכ"ל בית האבות הספרדי, שמח שאנחנו יכולים לשתף פעולה ולארח כאן את פרופסור אולשנסקי, ואני שמח אני מקווה שבאמת הבשורה תבוא מכאן, של הזקנה.
אמרתי לו שסבתא שלי תמיד אמרה, כולנו רוצים אריכות ימים, אבל אף אחד לא רוצה להיות זקן. בבקשה.
Morning רמב"ם, על משקל בוקר ערב טוב קיסריה. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm very honored to lead the project of academical cooperation between the בית האבות הספרדי and the Department of Gerontology at the University of Haifa. Now you've just met Mr. Yaron Raz, who is the CEO of Bet Avraham, and our Department of Gerontology is led by Professor Yuval Palgi. And within the framework of this cooperation, our distinguished guest this year was, and still is, Professor Olshansky, who shared with us his knowledge and wisdom and gave us some enlightening and instructive lectures and was kind and generous to share it with you as well. Let me take a moment to present Professor Olshansky, but that I'll have to read, and it will be much slower. So, Professor Olshansky is a full professor at the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a research associate at the Center on Aging at the University of Chicago, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. His research focuses on estimates of the upper limit to human longevity and the pursuit of scientific means to slow aging. Professor Olshansky is on the board of the directors of the American Federation of Aging Research. He's the first author of The Quest for Immortality, Science at the Frontiers of Aging, and A Measured Breath of Life, and he co-edited Aging, the Longevity Dividend. In 2016, Professor Olshansky was honored with a Donald Kent Award from the Gerontological Society of America and the Irving Wright Award from the American Federation of Aging Research. And he was named one of the next street's influencer in aging. Professor Olshansky, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm really greatly appreciative from the organizers for inviting me. As I've said before, I've been to Israel a few times, and I'm always delighted to come back, so don't hesitate to invite me again. I'm only going to be here for about 45 minutes, and I know it's a short amount of time for us to spend together, so I'm going to spend a little time walking you through something that may challenge some of your conventional wisdoms about aging and longevity, and communicating some complicated concepts in straightforward ways is the challenge and an opportunity, and that's what I'm going to try to do. Now, I'm also a teacher, which means if somebody has questions, if something doesn't make sense, if something strikes you right away, raise your hand, interrupt me. I like being interrupted, and I like questions, so please don't hesitate to do so. I'm going to start out with a short video that I want to show you, and I have two videos that I will illustrate. The first one is going to contain an abbreviated description of this entire message that I'm going to try and get across today, and then I will provide some background material on that during the rest of the discussion. Let's see how well this works.
What was the major medical breakthrough in modern history? Was it anesthesia, antibiotics, or vaccination? Was it the wonders of medical imaging, from x-rays and ultrasounds to CAT scans? Or pacemakers, coronary angioplasty, heart transplants, or genetic engineering? Could it have been drugs like Prozac, statins, or even Viagra? No. It was the discovery and dissemination of basic public health, such as sanitation, hand washing, refrigeration, and indoor living and working environments. Before the 1850s, we didn't understand its importance in warding off communicable diseases, and people died as a result, often in thousands, and almost always at very young ages. Public health fundamentally changed what it means to be human. Along with modern medical breakthroughs, it was simple things like clean water and sanitation that helped humans dramatically change the conditions under which we live, enabling us to experience much longer lives and, for the first time with great regularity, the biological aging of our bodies. We succeeded in adding 30 years on average to the lives of individuals in many parts of the world over the last century. A dramatic achievement, to be sure, but the real question is, where does this leave us now? Is there a price we have to pay for the privilege of living longer? The answer is a definitive yes. While communicable diseases once killed us at a young age, today many more people live long enough for the privilege of experiencing chronic degenerative diseases associated with old age. Fragile bones, muscle atrophy, cancer, heart disease, sensory impairments, all signs that the human body was not designed for long-term use. In fact, we may have already reached, or in a way actually exceeded, the biological limitations of our bodies. When people reach older ages with both mind and body intact, it's a wondrous thing to behold. But where one or the other doesn't make it, the result can be devastating, a prolongation of old age, the very thing many of us fear most. Under these conditions, longer lives can be emotionally and financially challenging for the dying as well as family and friends. But aging and old age need not be thought of only as a time of loss and decline. For increasingly larger segments of society, healthy and productive aging is normal, representing a unique opportunity that few people throughout history had an opportunity to experience. A healthy older life can and should be nurtured. Today, a new medical breakthrough stands before us that may be as important as public health a century ago. I believe science is on the verge of discovering a longevity dividend, the health and economic benefits that would accrue to individuals and societies resulting from a successful effort to slow biological aging. Science is not there yet, but if we find a way to extend the period of youthful vigor, even by just a few years, the trade-off of chronic diseases for 30 years of life that public health brought us in the last century will yield a new and more positive way of thinking about aging and the extended lives many of us enjoy.
So I will basically make the argument that with regard to human longevity, there are two ceilings, soft ceilings, but ceilings nonetheless. One ceiling at about 50, a life expectancy of about 50, that existed in the early part of the 20th century. And we broke through that ceiling with medical technology, with antibiotics. We were able to live much longer than what existed in the beginning part of the 20th century. Critically important today, I would suggest, is another ceiling, a soft ceiling as well, but a bit thicker than the one that existed more than a century ago. And that second ceiling is the biological process of aging itself. And that second ceiling is the one that I would suggest we are butting up against right now in long-lived populations. So I will make a declarative statement right here, and then I'll spend the rest of my time trying to defend it. The declarative statement that I will make now is that how long we live today in long-lived populations is about as long as we are going to live. This is the limit to human longevity. Now, don't get me wrong. I would suggest that we could certainly reduce the risk of death from many fatal and disabling diseases that exist today. We can make progress against those. Death rates can go down, but it will no longer have an impact, any significant impact, on the life expectancy of a population. Now, I work at the population level. I'm about 30,000 feet above the ground. watching what you're doing in the trenches, dealing with your patients. And what I will suggest is that you're doing, of course, exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which is saving and extending lives. What I will suggest from 30,000 feet is that we are no longer having any significant impact on the life expectancy of a population. We are getting incremental improvements in longevity, and I would suggest in our modern world, we've placed ourselves into a very dangerous situation. And that dangerous situation is that as we continue to extend the envelope of survival, we may very well achieve something that we don't like. We may make ourselves live longer, but we may also increase the period of frailty and disability among survivors to extreme old age. We may be heading in a very dangerous direction, and I would suggest in order to get around this dangerous direction, there is something we can do. That's what I'm going to show you what it is. Now, in order to understand thoroughly this line of reasoning, I have to take you back more than 100 years. It's really important to get a sense of history, of thinking behind human longevity. And I just want to plant the seed of what it is that influences how long we live. It's critically important to understand that. So what I'm going to do is draw upon an image that was created by Carl Pearson back in 1897. You know this person, Carl Pearson, because this is the same Pearson that you learned from your statistics books on Pearson correlation. Pearson, back in 1897, was asked to create an image of what death looks like in humans. So he created something called the Bridge of Life. It looks like anything but the Bridge of Life, of course. It looks more like the Bridge of Death. Each one of these skeletons represents the force of mortality, and each one of those individuals on the bridge represents humans in different phases of the lifespan. So you could see way over on the left, the force of mortality is about to bash that infant over the head, which implies that infant mortality was extremely high back in 1897. Childhood mortality was very high. That child is being taken out by a Gatling gun, a very effective way of killing somebody. The least effective method of killing is occurring right at puberty. That's with the bow and arrow. The risk of death rises again with the use of a musket at middle age. And then mortality is picking off older individuals with a rifle, one at a time: heart disease, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's. But if you notice that the skeleton at the end is not looking at its target, it doesn't have to. And the reason is that if he misses with heart disease, cancer, stroke, or Alzheimer's using his rifle, if you notice, there's no end to that bridge, which is another way of saying we are not going to achieve immortality and we are not going to achieve radical life extension, that there's an underlying biological process that occurs in our bodies with the passage of time, and if heart disease, cancer, and stroke don't get you, aging will. And this particular message is a critical one to understand the fundamental difference between the diseases that occur in aging bodies and the underlying biological process of aging that occurs independent of those disease risks. What that means, of course, is that if we succeed in reducing the risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, and Alzheimer's, which many of you are trying to do and should continue to do, the biological process of aging marches on unaltered by anything that you do to treat these specific diseases. And therein lies the danger. Because we've created for ourselves in this modern era a point at which aging becomes the most important risk factor for the things that go wrong with us. And if we continue along this pathway to attack one disease at a time, as if they're independent of each other, my fear, and the fear of many of us that are now working in this field, is that if we succeed in this effort to extend life, we may very well pay a price, something that we don't like. And the argument is that if heart disease, cancer, and stroke go down, something else will go up. Remember, death is a zero-sum game. So when something goes down, something else must go up. The fear is Alzheimer's disease, neurological conditions, and believe it or not, infectious diseases will reemerge as critically important factors that influence duration of life of future cohorts of older people. This is what death looks like in humans. This is the age, this is an age-specific trajectory of mortality. This is on a semi-log scale. It looks like this everywhere in the world. If you plotted out death rates for Israel, it would look exactly like this. High early age mortality, declines to its lowest point at puberty, and rises exponentially thereafter. This is what Pearson was looking at back in 1897. He just created a useful picture to illustrate what death looks like. The critically important message here is that the age trajectory of death for humans has never changed, ever, in human history. Even though death rates have gone down, and you can see the reduction in death rates here, the trajectory itself has never changed. This tells you that there's a constancy and a fundamental biological phenomenon that is influencing how long we are capable of living. And unless we influence that process itself, we will butt up against a ceiling, a longevity ceiling. And I know this goes against the grain of some of my colleagues who argue we're all going to live to 100 or we're all going to live to 120. I will say this is not going to happen. As long as we live now is about as long as we are going to live. I'll probably say that a couple more times. So, why does death occur with such regularity? Now, I have to provide this background only because when I discovered the importance of evolution and the evolutionary biology, it became clear to me why that mortality trajectory that I just showed you looks the way it does. So I'm not going to go into excruciating detail here, but I do want to show you some of the figures involved in the evolutionary theory of senescence, and it goes back all the way to August Weismann from 1891, Sir Peter Medawar from 1952. He basically argued that things that happen bad late in life, you know, he refers to that area as a genetic dustbin when bad things can express themselves. George Williams developed the concept of antagonistic pleiotropy, good early, bad late. That was sort of a fundamental argument back in the middle part of the 20th century, and then Tom Kirkwood developed the concept of disposable soma, which is another way of saying as soon as you have reproduced and ensured the reproductive success of your offspring, there's nothing stopping the body from going away. You've performed your function of passing your genes on to the next generation. So I use this analogy as a way to illustrate the evolutionary theory of senescence. Up on the top there, I illustrate this using a race car analogy. There's a race that takes place in the United States. It's called the Indianapolis 500, and these automobiles are run around the track 500 times. And the engineers who build these cars they construct them to last 500 miles. If they only constructed them to last for 400 miles, no one would make it to the end of the race. Do they have any incentive to construct these cars to last for 1,000 miles? Of course not, because they're going to turn the engine off at 500 miles. So they construct them, they engineer them to last for 500 miles. There's a very specific reason why they construct them the way they do, because they know when the end of the race is. Well, if they run these cars around the track past the normal end of the race and they watch when they all fail, you would actually see a distribution of death times or failure times for these cars that would resemble that of humans and other living things. Some would die early, some would live long, and there would be this distribution along the way. But you would start to see things go wrong with these automobiles that you wouldn't ordinarily see because you turn the engine off at 500 miles. Well, as it turns out, the same logic applies to humans and other sexually reproducing species, except the end of the race is not a measure of distance, it's a measure of time. Here, we need to make it to our reproductive ages. We need to produce offspring. We need to ensure the reproductive success of our offspring. That's the grandparenthood, you can see right in the middle. And what have we done during the course of the 20th century? We pushed out the envelope of survival quite successfully into the post-reproductive region of the lifespan, where we get to see things go wrong with our bodies that we ordinarily wouldn't have an opportunity to see. So the rise of heart disease, cancer, stroke, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, the things that you see and treat every day, is a consequence of success, not failure. It's a consequence of surviving long enough to allow these diseases and disorders to express themselves in bodies that weren't designed to last this long. Now, herein lies the danger. If we continue to push out the envelope of survival into older and older regions of the lifespan, we will see things go wrong with our bodies that we didn't see before or that we saw with a lower frequency. The frequency will rise dramatically. And therein lies the dilemma that we face today. And I'm going to show you a figure that illustrates this concept in a minute that we just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association about 4 weeks ago. And I'll show this to you. I put this up here. It's actually a useful figure because it illustrates something that you may not be aware of. What I've done here, so forget all the words for the moment, just look at the picture. So all I did was I took the duration of life of one species, us, humans, and I divided us into 3 regions. The pre-reproductive region, that's the blue region on the left, the reproductive region between puberty and menopause, or its equivalent in men, and then the post-reproductive region of the lifespan. To make a long story short, you see this in other sexually reproducing species as well. As soon as a species reaches reproductive ages, we start producing babies. As soon as we start producing babies, the ability to influence gene frequencies in subsequent generations begins to decline. Now, since we're no longer producing offspring in the post-reproductive region of the lifespan, there's no penalty for accumulating harmful genes that are expressed in the purple region of the lifespan, because you've already passed your genes on to the next generation. This is the concept of antagonistic pleiotropy. Things that are good early can be harmful late, and there's no penalty for having harmful late because it's too late. You've passed your genes on to the next generation. What my colleagues and I have demonstrated is that the duration of life of humans and other sexually reproducing species is calibrated to the onset and length of this window, this time window between puberty and menopause. So let me rephrase. How long we live is influenced not so much by how we live our lives, although it's easy to shorten our lives. There's lots of things that we can do to shorten them. But the fundamental force that influences how long humans are capable of living is a fixed set of genetic programs that control growth, development, and reproduction. And aging, what we know of as aging, is an inadvertent byproduct. It's an accident of surviving into the post-reproductive region of the lifespan. So the things that go wrong with us, for the most part, are not our fault. They will happen. It's like, suggesting it's the car's fault for falling apart when you drive it for 200,000 miles. No, the car wasn't engineered to last that long. It was only engineered to last a much shorter time period, and our bodies really were not designed for long-term use. It was really designed for shorter-term use. So let me illustrate how this works. A mouse goes through puberty at about 30 days, and it lives 1,000 days. A dog goes through puberty at about 9 months, and it lives about 5,000 days. An elephant lives about 26,000 days. Humans, we go through puberty at about 11 to 12 years of age, and we live about 29,000 days on average, a maximum of 45,000. A sea turtle goes through puberty at 50 years of age. It lives for 150 years. It can reproduce for a century. A bowhead whale, a mammal just like us, almost just like us, can live for 210 years. And a Greenland shark can live for 500 years. When does it go through puberty? At 150 years of age. Puberty. It has to wait 150 years to have sex, but then it can have sex for 350 years, so it's very happy. It's just another way of saying duration of life is calibrated to the onset and length of the reproductive window. It's fixed. We are not altering that fixed genetic program anytime soon. There is a ceiling to how long we are living. So please, when somebody comes along and says, we're all going to live to 100, we're all going to live to 150, we're all going to live to 200, nonsense. It is not going to happen. And I hear it all the time. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm about to end this message with a suggestion that we can break through this ceiling. And I'm going to show you how I think it's going to happen. I also don't think it's going to make us live a whole lot longer than we do now. Let me pass by this. Actually, I'm going to pass by all of this because this is the logic and the rationale behind what I just told you. So I want to get to some of the other elements of this message. Now, I come from a school of public health, and I teach graduate students in epidemiology. And I'm sure you have a program here where you teach your students about what it is that influences the risk factors for the diseases that you're treating. This may or may not be what you're teaching your students. I don't know, does this look familiar? It should look familiar, because this is what often is being taught to students about the risk factors for the major diseases that occur. And I've had this discussion and this debate many times with my colleagues in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois, and I say this is not right. While it's true for sure that these are risk factors, when you look at the most important risk factor in long-lived populations, like the Israeli population, like the US population, the most important risk factor for the things that go wrong with us is the biological process of aging itself. Aging dwarfs everything else. If you want to influence heart disease, go after aging. I'm not saying we shouldn't be, going after hypertension, smoking, cholesterol, and diabetes. Don't get me wrong. We still need to do that. But if you really want to have a powerful impact on heart disease, there's your target. I'm showing it to you in red and white, not black and white. This is what you've been taught about risk factors for cancer. This is what you may be teaching your students about risk factors for cancer. Aging dwarfs them all as the most powerful force that influences the risk of cancer. And keep in mind, the longer we live, the more important this risk factor becomes. If we continue to push out the envelope of survival deeper and deeper, aging becomes more important. So we're making it more important by successfully addressing these other risk factors. This is what you have been taught about Alzheimer's disease. By far, aging dwarfs everything else in terms of its impact on Alzheimer's disease. If you want to have a powerful impact on Alzheimer's, there's your target. You should be getting a consistent message here, by the way, if it isn't obvious what that consistent message is. Now, this is the image that I produced in the JAMA article 4 weeks ago. The reason why this is an important, and I wasn't the only person to write an article for JAMA. The editors at JAMA contacted my colleagues and I, and because they got wind of this concept of the longevity dividend that we have been working on for several years. They got wind of this, and they said, we don't really understand it quite as well. We want you to communicate these concepts to physicians more effectively. So they invited us to draft articles. And I asked the editors, would you allow me to use a figure that I created to illustrate this point? Because every time I illustrate this, people come up to me afterwards and they say, I get it now. I now understand it. A light bulb has turned on. And now it's clear to me what's going on and where we're headed. And so JAMA allowed me to publish this figure, and let me illustrate what you're looking at. And I actually, will be honest with you, I was invited to give a talk on aging last year. It was an hour-long talk, and I used only one figure for an entire hour. This was it. So let me explain. I'm not going to take an hour, by the way. I know we don't have that much time, but I think I can do this in much, much less time. So what you're looking at here is what's called a distribution of death. for a population. Now, I happen to use data from the United States, but it would look pretty much identical if you use data from Israel or other developed nations. In fact, yours would actually look more favorable because you live longer here than we do in the United States. Now, here's the explanation. If you took a group of 100,000 babies born in a given year, let's say 1900, and you plotted out the ages that all those babies would die, if you applied the death rates in those years to those babies throughout their lives, you would get what's called the distribution of death. So the lighter line, which is a little bit higher, is the distribution of death for females in the United States in 1900. It would look pretty much the same in almost every other part of the world. What do you see there? Very high infant and child mortality. It's the same thing that Benjamin Gompertz saw in 1825 and Pearson saw in 1897. It all looks exactly the same. You can see maternal mortality, that little bump right around age 20. That's maternal mortality. You made it past the first few decades of life, you had a decent chance of living out into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. During the course of the 20th century, we dramatically reduced early age mortality. Keep in mind, the area under the curve is the same, right? It's 100,000 babies. So what have we done? We've shifted, we've redistributed death from the young to the old. We've built what I refer to as the Mountain of Mortality. This is where death occurs now, everywhere, in long-lived populations. Predictably, between 65 and 95, almost all deaths are occurring in this age window. It's not a surprise. We know exactly when and where death is occurring. In your population, that blue line is going to be shifted just a tiny bit over to the right because you live a couple of years longer than we do in the United States. The key thing here is that red zone, that area of red that I put up there as a way to illustrate that this is a time period when frailty and disability rises exponentially. So what have we done? We've pushed ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper into the red zone where frailty and disability is expressing itself with increasing frequency. And the deeper we go into that red zone, the more difficult it becomes to live longer and the more difficult it becomes to treat the diseases and disorders that are expressed in this region of the lifespan. We refer to it in public health and epidemiology as competing risks, which you know this from treating older patients. If you're trying to save the life of an 80-year-old or a 90-year-old, you know that if you save them from dying from a particular health problem and you push them out the door, it's going to be a relatively short time period before they come back with something else. And then they may come back again with another health problem, and they may be a little deeper into the red zone, and the further you go into that red zone, the more compressed these diseases become, which is precisely why it becomes increasingly more difficult to make us live longer the longer we live. This is, and look, I'll be honest with you, I said this in 1990 in a lead article in Science. The title of that paper was In Search of Methuselah, Estimating the Upper Limits to Human Longevity. And I said the exact same thing 28 years ago. I said the longer we live, the more difficult it would become to push out the envelope of survival further. A lot of people did not like what I said. They did not agree with it. And it has happened. You are certainly seeing the same phenomenon here in Israel that we have been seeing in the United States since about 2010, which is a leveling off of life expectancy. We're seeing this in many parts of the developed world today. We have approached a ceiling. All right. How much time do I have left, by the way? About 10 minutes? Okay. All right. 30 minutes. 13 minutes. Now 12 after I was asking those questions. So, so the question is, given all of this bad news that I just gave you, what do we do about it? Do we just continue to march on and attack heart disease, cancer, and stroke and push ourselves deeper and deeper into the red zone? We could do that. And I would suggest that if we continue along this pathway, we are not going to like what we see. We are probably going to see a pretty dramatic escalation in the onset, prevalence, and severity of Alzheimer's disease and a whole suite of conditions that we ordinarily wouldn't have an opportunity to see, or we see with a lower frequency because we don't live long enough to express these diseases in later regions of the lifespan. I would refer to the human brain as one of the Achilles heels of the human body. We're not, you know, when we try to make ourselves live longer, often we are not treating the aging brain, we are treating the aging body. And what happens as a result is you get this mismatch between mind and body at extreme old age. And you know this, of course, from personal experience, from seeing your parents and your grandparents and your patients that make it out to very old age, when mind and body don't match. And anytime you have a mismatch at extreme old age, it's a disaster. When you have a match of healthy mind and healthy body at extreme old age, it's a wonderful thing to see. And that's what we are trying to advocate. This is an article where we first developed this line of reasoning about the longevity dividend, and you saw the 300-word video earlier. What I can tell you is that a consortium of scientists and scientific organizations from across the globe, including research scientists here in Israel and including organizations here in Israel, are advocating for this concept of a longevity dividend initiative, an effort to slow the biological process of aging. So you remember I showed you the most powerful force that's influencing all of these diseases and disorders? It's aging. We are now agreeing that the way to achieve primary prevention in the future is to attack the biological process of aging itself. So we've come together, we've developed a line of reasoning for pursuing this. We've written books. Movies have been made about this now, and I'm actually going to show you a video of one of these movies. I want to get to that before, I don't know, we'll see if I have time to get into some of these other potential interventions that researchers are pursuing, because it's important to, oh wait, I do want to show you this. That picture in the middle at the top, that was my dad at 95. So he was one of those individuals that lived very healthy right up until 8 days before he died. He lived to 96. Avraham, Olshansky. The lady in the lower right-hand corner is Jeanne Calment. You know Jeanne Calment? She lived to 122. She's the world record holder for human longevity. She smoked for 100 years. As I tell my students, that is not a license to smoke, because most people that smoke will die earlier than they would have otherwise. So I'm going to show you a couple of minutes of a video here, and let me preface this by saying that my colleagues and I have spent an enormous amount of time trying to influence the people that have power to advocate for this concept of aging and aging biology and trying to slow the biological process of aging. We met with senators. We met with the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. I'm going to show it to you here momentarily. The first part of the video I'm going to show you, ironically enough, we met with Senator Clara McCaskill from Missouri, who is no longer our senator, a senator in the United States. She lost the election yesterday, unfortunately. We liked her a lot. But you'll see the interaction that we had with her, and then you're going to see the interaction that we had with the Food and Drug Administration when we proposed the idea of slowing the biological process of aging as a therapeutic intervention. And I will just say unambiguously, a breakthrough occurred, and you're going to see it right here. So let's take a look at this video. Let's see if I can get this to do what I want it to do. We have to constantly battle with this line of reasoning.
How can we be heard when there's so much noise like that around us?
If they can win support from the highest reaches of government, scientists believe they can change our nation's outlook on aging. They meet with the ranking member of the Senate Aging Committee to make their case.
So nice of you to meet with us.
Of
Thank
course.
you. What people don't realize is we have found a way to intervene with aging, and these concepts have been proven in animals and is now going to be tested in humans. The major risk for any one of the diseases is aging.
Instead of thinking it as an individual disease, thinking about it, okay, as we get older, this is what our bodies do, and we address that issue instead of, I've got to worry about diabetes, or I got to worry about a stroke, or I've got to worry about Alzheimer's.
Yeah, what we've discovered is that basically if we learn how to treat those underlying causes, we can delay all these diseases that kill and debilitate people as a group.
People don't realize that just reducing adult onset of diabetes by a reasonable, modest percentage is enough to get us out of debt. So I can imagine if we can do this across the board, just delaying slightly, and of course the train wreck that's coming in all of our government programs is in fact the demographic bubble. If we can get a handle on slowing the aging process, if we could actually do that, we are talking about a huge economic boon to this country.
Every major public health advance in the 20th century had a champion, somebody who stood up and said, I want this to happen, I'm going to make it happen. And we're hoping that sometime before the president leaves office, he raises this issue once again, considers it a global challenge.
Well, I'll be glad to tell him.
We would be delighted.
Yeah, I will be glad to tell him.
There's a lot of excitement in the field now, and we feel traction. We can feel it. We can sense it, that people are coming on board.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Terrific to meet you guys. Thanks so much. There's a ways to go before most Americans understand that this is maybe the most exciting scientific development in terms of the healthcare community that could happen in our lifetimes.
So Claire McCaskill got it. She understood. And we were contacted by this was in President Obama's administration. We were contacted by the Obama administration who wanted to transform this concept of a longevity dividend into a global challenge in health. I don't know if you're familiar with the global challenges that Obama was pushing. The first one was the Brain Initiative, which got an enormous amount of funding. The idea was to go after Alzheimer's disease, and we liked that idea. We knew it was a major health issue, but we were trying to get this to be his swan song, sort of the last issue that he would deal with before he left office. He ended up choosing what he referred to as the moonshot. I don't know if you heard this, but he ended up deciding that the going after cancer, trying to cure cancer, was going to be the best approach to take. And the reason he did this was because Vice President Biden lost his son to cancer. And he decided that that was going to be more important. Of course, we were suggesting that if you really want to go after the kind of cancer that killed Joe Biden's son, you would go after aging, not just send more money to the National Cancer Institute. Now, we met with the FDA because the meeting with the FDA was critical. And what you're going to see here is nothing less than a breakthrough. And I use that word without reservation and without hesitation. What happened during this meeting with the Food and Drug Administration opened up the door to companies, to organizations, to develop new types of clinical trials that would assess interventions designed to modulate aging. Up until then, it could not be done. And we think we opened up the door to this new type of clinical trial, and I'm going to show you what happened. Now, they turned the camera off when we went into the actual meeting with the FDA, but after the video, I'll tell you what happened inside the meeting itself.
bravely of it now, and I hope that I'll be peaceful and accepting. But I really do think that life is a pilgrimage, and that I'm on my way, and I'm on a way that I'm really looking forward to.
Today, Dr. Barzilai and his colleagues will try to convince the FDA to consider their study. In advance of their critical meeting, they gather to prepare.
We are here representing the field of the science of aging, and we think that this is a historical day for us because we're going to offer something that we believe is paradigm changing. I really want to frame the discussion today as what would we need to show in a clinical trial that would allow the FDA to approve a new indication for metformin for delaying multiple morbidities related to aging. Because we think metformin is the first one, but there are others that could be better than metformin, and we want to make sure that that's the template.
We have that hypothesis that metformin is one of those rare opportunities where it might act in a general fashion. It's an attractive hypothesis. The trial is required to see if it's true.
It started with a conceptual innovation that aging can be modified. Then years of work by a growing number of scientists in labs around the world and years of convincing people of their ideas. Maybe this is what a breakthrough looks like. If the FDA accepts that aging can be treated, the scientists believe it will forever transform healthcare and medicine.
I don't think that there are too many interventions in history that would rival the type of intervention that we're talking about here. It would influence almost everyone.
As a matter of policy, the FDA does not allow cameras into official proceedings. But they did agree to an interview immediately following their meeting.
We have lots of experience with claims to decrease the rate of heart attacks, to decrease the degree of dementia, drugs that prevent strokes, drugs that treat your diabetes. We have lots of experience with all that. But what's being sought and being talked about is a more broad claim to prevent a lot of the consequences of aging. So the question for us is, how do you show that?
We gauged their willingness to accept the general approach of targeting aging, something that they said right off the bat, we've never done anything like this before, and they were very receptive.
Their hope is that a wide variety of age-related problems, loss of muscle tone, dizziness, falling, dementia, loss of eyesight, all of those things, to do them all at once with a single treatment, that might make a convincing case that you're doing something beyond just treating the disease. That would be something never done before.
They didn't have any problem with the general approach. And I asked them specifically at the end, this is what I think I'm hearing. You don't have any problems with the general approach. And they basically said yes. So I don't think we could have had a better outcome.
If you really are doing something to alter aging, the population of interest is everybody. It surely would be revolutionary if they can bring it off. There's no doubt about it.
We always thought that the promised land is not in our reach. And I think that we are going to the promised land. The study will happen. The fact that the FDA is going to be part of it is really a major achievement, and eventually will be the template and affect health span in the next decade.
So the study that we're talking about here is a clinical trial testing metformin. It's a treatment for diabetes, but what do you call it? Glucamin. Here, it's glucamin. So glucamin, metformin, it has minimal side effects. It's been, introduced into the human body for over half a century. It's inexpensive, and it has side effects. The side effects appear to be a lowered risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, and Alzheimer's. People who are taking metformin with diabetes live longer than people not taking metformin. So the clinical trial is going to begin hopefully early next year. There was a reason why we chose metformin as sort of the first therapeutic intervention that we were going to pursue, but there's many, many other interventions. This is, look, folks, this is no longer hypothetical. Interventions to modulate aging are not theoretical. They are here today. They work. They've been documented to work in other species, and there's reason to believe that these therapeutic interventions will work in people. So while I say that there's a ceiling and we're there, I think we can break through this ceiling and find a way to further extend the period of healthy life and avoid the dangers associated with pushing ourselves deeper and deeper into the red zone. That's what we're trying to avoid, by the way. If you haven't seen that cartoon, an older man in front of his physician, remember the 20 extra years you added to your life through clean, healthy living? Well, these are them. We don't want to push out people into older regions of the lifespan in order to become more frail and more disabled. That's not what we want. We are pursuing an extended period of healthy life. We are not trying to make us live longer. Metformin, senolytics, other compounds and interventions designed to slow aging are not designed for life extension. They are being designed for health extension. The compression of the red zone, that is what we are trying to achieve. So you've now been inoculated with this concept of a longevity dividend, and I thank you gracefully for your attention.